Mercedes, in my honest opinion, has something that no other team has. A seat that nobody wants. And now it's said that Carlos Sainz is odds-on favourite to be partnering George Russell next year. Oh, for the love of Bernie Collins, don't. It's hard to imagine that just a couple of months ago, the seat that Lewis Hamilton was about to vacate was considered to be hot property. Tons of us video creators made videos about the subject, even I did. We were all thinking about, oh, this could be a really big opportunity for a certain driver to maybe get some podiums, or maybe get the chance to go for a world title eventually. It seemed like the majority of the grid were odds-on to be able to have a crack at the second seat at Mercedes. But now, just a few races later, that outlook has completely changed. Fernando Alonso, considered by people within the paddock to be the plan B for Mercedes, has taken himself out of the equation by signing a very unorthodox arrangement with Aston Martin, which basically means that he in theory is going to be spending the rest of his life at Aston Martin. He'll probably be buried in an Aston Martin because he absolutely loves the team that much. It's kind of weird, but also really fascinating. Then there's been recent rumours about Sebastian Vettel joining the fray within the new circle, as to being a potential replacement, and Toto not exactly denying it. He's remaining relatively coy about the subject, and some people are even thinking that he might even take over Toto's job, but it's still up in the air. But one thing is for sure, is that the idea of racing at Mercedes right now is no longer as lustrous as it used to be. And I don't really think it's got much to do with the performance as of late. The kind of team that Mercedes is, it will come back to them in some shape or form later on down the road, maybe in the next regulation cycle, but it's more to do with the overall outlook of the team itself, where it's going. And many drivers are now looking at the future of Mercedes and going, yeah, nope. But Carlos Sainz, though, is rumoured to be joining them. According to Corriere dello Sport, he's about to announce a deal with Mercedes in an effective swap situation. I mean, it's not a proper swap situation. There's been no talk between Ferrari and Mercedes about actively swapping drivers together. It just so happens to be the case that one driver used to drive for Ferrari, one used to drive for Mercedes, and they're swapping over. With connections to Italian sources, the publication is, as well as others, to be considering that the Spaniard will indeed not be going to Sauber and then Audi, which of course has been the most talked about arrangement after Ferrari, but instead, it'll be a 2-year contract with the German team. Now, okay, that sounds fairly decent. A technical multi-year contract, another one of those jobbies, at Mercedes, not too shabby. Even covers 2026 as well, so Mercedes might be pretty good. Carlos Sainz might be onto a winner there. Hold it though. It's not your typical 2-year contract or a something and beyond. No, it's pretty much the same contract that Lewis got, a 1+1 dealie. And we don't know which side of the table will be the one to exercise the option. Will it be the driver or will it be the team? But one thing is for sure, it's not going to be one of the most fortuitous of relationships if you are starting off your relationship with a 1+1 deal, considering who Carlos Sainz is. Currently, the only Ferrari driver to have won in the last 2 seasons. And Sainz has been considered by many of the teams to be an option for their future, but Mercedes didn't really come up in the conversation. Not really. Not really an enthusiastic option. It's like, Mercedes? Oh, I mean, yeah, I suppose. It doesn't seem right in the intentions of Carlos Sainz. It doesn't really fit in with the overall vision that the driver has. He is now approaching 30. Not exactly the twilight of his career, he's still in his prime. But if he picks the wrong team to go to for the next couple of seasons, then his options after that might be starting to dwindle. You know, mid-30s, you might be lucky if you get back to the top again. Yeah, so he's got to really pick carefully. And also, I think Carlos is done playing the wingman. The only team really appreciating his value as a team leader were at the likes of McLaren, where he spent a good 2 seasons, and probably, had he not signed the deal with Ferrari, he probably would still be there, because Carlos liked McLaren and McLaren liked him. And it seemed to gel really well. In fact, I think he's the only team he's had a proper multi-year contract with before Ferrari, so they did value him a lot. And if Carlos were to drive for any other team, it'd better be as the de facto leader without question, or at the very least, he is going to be getting equal billing with the other driver, which is also supposed to be rumoured that he would be level pegging with George Russell. But do you really think that's going to happen? Do you really think George will go on equal terms after having to wait so long under Lewis? No. You might be thinking that I'm crazy, that Carlos should bite at this opportunity. Not go and drive for Sauber or Williams. Even if Sauber becomes Audi, it's still going to take some time for them to develop to become competitive. as James Key said at one point, that Audi won't be fully online really until 2027. And that is basically having to wait for 2 seasons with so-so performance, and then maybe the 3rd season might be good. Okay, it's not a Fernando, McLaren, Honda time frame, but still it's pretty close. And at least Mercedes has some level of performance, even though they've been complaining about it for oh so long. Up until recently, they were still either the 2nd or 3rd fastest team, so they did have some competitive edge. It's just that edge sort of worn off recently, but it's still there, kind of. They can score points on the regular. But the problem is that where the team is presently, it's not quite as fascinating anymore. It's clearly no longer a front-running team, not right at the top. In some races, you might even say they're downright midfielders. I know, shocking, isn't it? This is pretty much their worst season since 2011. At this time, they are the 4th or 5th fastest team, but that could easily change if the W15 improves. But one thing is for sure, by the time that comes to pass and the W15 comes good, the majority of the 2025 grid could easily be sewn up, so drivers do have to make a decision within the next month or 2 about where they're going to go, and hang their hat on for 2026 and the brand new regulation cycle. And I got a really sinking feeling that the silly season that we were anticipating, that it was going to be the silliest season that ever seasoned, will slowly turn out to be just a deflating balloon, a wet fart, as then it eventually becomes really predictable, or the only slots available are for teams that don't exactly set the world alight. It's certainly far less interesting than it was a couple of weeks ago. But the point is though, is that a lot of the drivers are no longer viewing Mercedes as a really interesting or enticing prospect. I mean, Fernando Alonso himself said he's no longer considering Mercedes because he thinks, well, it's not really worth it, they're not as attractive. Aston Martin are just as good at them, so why would I leave? After having played them like a fiddle for many weeks beforehand. So what does this all mean? Well, it means that top-class drivers may not be that interested in going to the team, and the expectations of said outfit will have been lessened. Which means that the risk that Toto Wolff had wanted to enact, but hadn't yet due to not wanting to push them too hard, could perhaps come to pass, with minimal penalty or minimal loss of points. And at this point, Mercedes really need to try absolutely everything. They've got to throw everything at the wall, try anything they can to get back some competitive edge, or at least grab some headlines, having lost Lewis Hamilton. And that is of course done by signing Kimi Antonelli. Oh great, it's another one of those videos, isn't it? Now I know what you're saying, but hear me out on this one. It seems a lot less far-fetched than it did a while ago, the idea of Kimi Antonelli in F1. With the boy about to turn 18 in August, Mercedes could easily pull a stunning coup and decide to throw caution to the wind and sign the Italian driver for the long term to learn under the tutelage of George Russell, who will essentially acquire the role of team leader from Lewis Hamilton, having waited for so long, practically since 2019. And honestly, I think George is ready. He fits the tone of Mercedes so well these days. They are really analytical, they are data-driven, they are overly transparent to the point of nerdishness. And George is like that too. He is very vocal and detailed about his feedback. And it just feels right George being there, you know? Whereas with Lewis Hamilton, sure, he had that heritage with Mercedes back in the past during his karting days, but at the same time, he sort of did his own thing, which was perfectly okay, by the way, because this is Lewis Hamilton. He is his own brand, he is his own message. But at this point now in his career, that rhetoric has seemed to have diverged a little bit too far. So I feel like with Kimi Antonelli being a relative blank slate in terms of personality, could fit well with the likes of George, and perhaps it might fit with the overall Mercedes and the way that it wants to evolve post-Lewis Hamilton. But I don't think it will go so far where we hear Kimi Antonelli say blimey or crikey or anything like that. Okay, if you're talking about Antonelli, why would they sign Carlos then? Are they getting rid of George? Well, of course not, they're getting rid of George. Didn't you hear what I just said? No. Really, the way I see it is that Carlos or any other driver will be just a means to an end. They won't be part of Mercedes for the long term. They're not going to be viewing that driver as an important part of their future game plan. They would only sign Carlos because, well, he's knocking around and he's unemployed right now, so why not? And Carlos could see this as a means to remain relevant at the front end of the grid, so it is sort of a two-way street. Like with many other drivers at the end of their contracts, the 2026 Formula 1 car is something that they do have at the back of their mind. A lot of these teams could find themselves at different places in terms of the pecking order. Remember 2009, Williams and Toyota, along with Brawn GP at the beginning of the season, turn out to be incredibly competitive. And Ferrari and McLaren in both 2009 and 2014 proved to be good examples in getting the brand new regulations wrong, despite being so storied. Had they not had the financial clout and the immense facilities on hand and practically a limitless budget to correct the problems and get upgrade after upgrade after upgrade on that car within about 8 or 9 races, those teams would have had a really torrid time of it. If there had been a cost cap, they would have been screwed. And in order to keep Audi and Honda sweet, the power unit rules are locked in, but the aerodynamic rules, they're still a little bit up in the air, so there's still a lot of guesswork involved for any driver considering their future within Formula One. Do they stay where they are, where they sort of know the game plan, or do they go to another team because they think they can do better based on the information that they are given and, of course, what they're pitched? Any driver's got to be really shrewd with their choice, and there are a lot of rumblings going on that Mercedes are pretty much ahead when it comes to the power unit at least. 2026 is looking pretty good for them, but whether or not that might translate well to the aerodynamics front, we don't know yet. But at the very least, the power unit's sounding really good, so that might be enough to tempt Sainz to maybe try it out and see whether it's legit. And who knows, the W16 of 2025 might turn out to be really ruddy good. All of the legwork from this year might have paid dividends for the following year. And sure, it's not the same regulation cycle for 2026, but still, it's good results, extra prize money, and it's being part of the team on an operational level. You get used to it. And something that Lewis Hamilton will only get to sit for a little while, if at all. My guess is probably around Canada when the W15 will come good. But despite that, he might be having a fantastic time, and in 2025, he produces some really good results. But the result of his future, if this 1+1 deal is legit and true, it could be taken out of his hands, no matter what Carlos would do. If Kimi Antonelli does the business in Formula 2, and he's in the top 3 if they decide to give him one more year in F2 to find his feet, it might mean that Carlos might be just on a hiding to nowhere. He could easily just chucked out because there's no real love lost between him and Mercedes. It would be a marriage of convenience with him and Mercedes, because the whole talk about him going to Brackley just didn't really elicit inspired ideas or going, wow, that's a really good idea in combination. People just go like, well, I mean, it's an open seat. I mean, any port in a storm. And Kimi Antonelli is clearly the future of Mercedes. Toto has been desperate to get him into Formula One, but has held his tongue so long, trying to keep himself reserved. Don't be complacent. Don't assume he'll do well. And then you sometimes hear him say, oh, we need to take drastic measures for the future. And then, of course, it all repeats again and again and again. And even if it did go to 2026, I doubt that Carlos would get a contract extension if he even won the world title. Toto is quite clearly betting the farm on Antonelli, having missed out on the chance to back Verstappen back for 2014, and that resulting in the birth of the junior team that found Antonelli in the first place. Wolff can't stop himself from putting so much pressure behind the kid. It's just ludicrous at this point. And so far, his F2 performance has been rather mixed. Sure, a 4th place finish at the feature race in Melbourne was not too shabby and not to be sniffed at, but before then, it wasn't exactly setting the world alight. Many people were thinking that he was going to be hitting the track all guns blazing. Everyone thought he was just going to do the same thing that he did at Formula 4 ADAC, as well as the Formula Regional events, that he would just trounce the competition, he would get a win on debut, and that Prema would give him the car that could do the business. I will be fair here though. Prema this year in F2 haven't exactly been setting the world alight themselves. In fact, they're actually having their worst season since the era of Sean Delisle. Yeah, it doesn't feel the same without Josh's contribution to that meme. So there is something to defend Antonelli, and perhaps once he's able to get to grips with the F2 car and the team can do the same, Kimi might be able to progress, especially once he gets the chance to drive a W13 around Imola and understand an F1 car for the first time. Yes, I mean, it's the W13. It's not exactly the world's best car, but it's something, right? I mean, have you driven a Formula 1 car in your life? I mean, okay, at least it's not the FW42 of 2019, am I right? But one thing that's giving Kimi the wind beneath his wings is that Mercedes, the team that is backing him, absolutely adores him. They are going to be giving him that Formula 1 seat. It's just a question of when rather than if. Sure, he might have a bit of a wobbly time in his rookie season. It could improve by the end of it. But it will come, either next year or the year after that. Mercedes right now, where they are in terms of the constructors' battle, they might feel like they can throw caution to the wind. They feel like they can take a punt and put an 18-year-old in the car. Just see what happens. It'll be fine. He can learn on the job under George. I mean, there is a bit more of an interest in younger drivers these days after the little cameo that Oliver Behrman had in Jeddah for Ferrari, where he got a 7th place. Yes, I know he was driving the second fastest car, that does help a lot, but by the end of that race he was getting within spitting distance of Leclerc. So the idea of younger drivers, even as young as 18, is something that everyone's quite curious about, and everyone's curious about Antonelli. And now the idea that he could actually be driving in Formula 1 next year will set many heart races pacing, and could easily plug the gap that is being left by Lewis Hamilton supporters. Toto is going to be betting the pumpernickel farm on him. And speaking of betting on the farm, the only thing that could possibly throw a spanner in the works for Antonelli is the supposed rumour that the Mercedes board has weighed in on the matter of the lineup again. Whereas they balked at the offer that Hamilton was requesting, the pay packet and the future role as an ambassador and a 3-year contract, they are now deciding to loosen their purse strings a little bit and offer a similar or bigger pay packet to the likes of Max Verstappen in enticing him over to Mercedes for the foreseeable future, given the trials and tribulations that the Red Bull upper staff have been going through lately. There's a lot of administrative rumblings surrounding Christian Horner, Adrian Newey and Helmut Marko. Yes, of course, it's currently conjecture, speculation and rumour, but it's the kind of thing that is simply not going away. It's not dying a death. And unless it gets completely confirmed with a contract extension officially, it will continue to rumble on for the foreseeable future. And Toto will keep on talking about this and alluding to this for as long as possible, even though Christian's basically said he ignores everything that Toto says at this point. And Max Verstappen has said that the burnt bridges between him and Toto have been repaired somewhat. There has been a case of forgive and forget going on. And that might lead people to hope that maybe Max might consider a role at Mercedes after all. But then that gets tempered somewhat by him saying in the same breath that right now he doesn't really see the sense of going to Mercedes at this point because they don't have the fastest car. And that point there, my friend, leads me back to the point I discussed earlier. Right now, Mercedes are no longer a big draw for the top drivers. Something that could not be said just a few months ago before the season started. Yes, of course money could sway people, but I don't really see that Max could be swayed that easily by cash. What he really wants, Max, is a car that can race well and competitively. And right now, Red Bull has that combination. And also the pay pack is pretty decent too. So yeah, that's probably not going to happen no matter how much people want it. So that's just going to lead us back to Carlos Sainz, the biggest option that Mercedes has right now for the short term, the very short term. And the slowly dawning prospect that the Mercedes seat is no longer an enticing prospect, but more like a poison chalice. Yes, Carlos could get that seat and drive for a decent team. We have to remember that they are still a decent team, no matter how much Toto keeps saying that, oh my god, they're terrible and they're in no man's land. But at the same time, though, he wouldn't really be part of the operation in a really, really intimate way. No, I'm not talking about that way, but in terms of really building a working relationship with the crew. He'd be there to fill in the gap if Kimi has one more year in F2. And then Kimi is more likely to be brought in at either the age of 18 or 19 or at the latest 20, and then Carlos will be left out on the streets once more. This is not a place, Mercedes, where Carlos can really build a long-term prospect at. He is not going to be the team leader. At best, he will be on equal footing with George. So really, him going to Mercedes would be a complete and utter mismatch and a real crying shame for his future within Formula 1. Everyone's looking at Carlos and thinking, why doesn't he have a long-term seat at the top team anymore? This just makes no sense. This is a complete travesty of justice. I mean, yes, Sauber, then Audi might turn out to be absolutely fantastic, and he would be the team leader there, but no one really knows for sure right now because Sauber, they can't even do their pit stops properly at the moment. What could they do in the future? In short, Carlos would be just keeping Kimi's seat warm. Because Toto is completely besotted by the Italian driver. He wants him in Formula 1, and now, since there's far less risk involved with them being the 4th or 5th fastest team, he can now have him in there right now. And trust me, we are going to be seeing Kimi in loads of FP1 sessions. We will probably see him at the Italian Grand Prix FP1 session because he'll have turned 18 just a few days prior, and then after that, we'll probably see him again, and then maybe one more time, most likely taking Lewis's spot because, hey, there's no love lost anymore. So right now, you would be a fool to accept the role at Mercedes. Unless you're Esteban Ocon, of course, in which case you're probably really desperate to get back in the Mercedes fold. And also, he'll probably do anything just to get away from Alpine. Which in a way is understandable, since his teammate Pierre Gasly is doing whatever he can to position himself as the team leader, citing that driving for a works team, no matter how hard they're struggling, is a worthwhile investment. Or is it because he has simply no choice other than Alpine? Well, you can go and watch this video right now to find out why I think him staying with Alpine might be a pretty good idea for his future within Formula 1.